Hello, my name is Ray Dogum, and welcome to the VibeCast. Thank you for joining us as we explore the exciting advancements in technology-enabled collaboration to excel important drug development. Vibe Bio seeks to find every cure for every community. We think big, as no one should be left behind in the pursuit of living a happy, healthy, and productive life, free from disease. Collectively, we have the skills, we have the technology, we have the passion. We now need the community catalyst to bring it all together. That's Vibe. We see a future where communities of biopharma experts and patients collaborate to identify high potential rare disease medicines and have the potential to access high capital on demand to develop them. The VibeCast is our weekly informational podcast as we explore some of the hottest topics in drug development with some of the dynamic people that make up the Vibe community. Join us to learn, imagine, question, and help us identify and develop solutions together. Our guests today are Casey McPherson and Rick Barkley, and together they started a company called Everlum Bio. Everlum Bio is pioneering a novel approach to drug development for rare diseases. As opposed to working on a single disease, Everlum is providing drug development as a service. Casey also has a daughter with a rare genetic disease caused by a mutation of the HNRNPH2 gene. To help his daughter, he founded To Cure a Rose Foundation to help fund the development of a drug to cure and treat this disease. Rick, Casey, welcome. Really excited to be having this conversation with you and learning more about Everlum Bio and what you guys have been working on. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us, Ray. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Maybe what you guys can first do is kind of give a brief bio about yourselves so the audience kind of knows who you are, what you've been working on, and then we can get into the presentation.
Sure. I'm Casey McPherson. I've been a professional musician most of my life, and up until about 5 years ago, and so I've been in real estate, app development, and had a couple of hits, and toured the world in my band, and so this is certainly approaching all this from a different perspective. And I'm first and foremost a father of two girls, Weston, who's 9, and Rose, with the rare neurodevelopmental disease. She is 7, and yeah, working on this all day, every day.
And Casey, I've listened to a few of your songs on YouTube. Amazing, really, just fun music and exciting. So, thanks for sharing.
Thanks, Ray. Appreciate it.
And so my name is Rick Barkley. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Everlum. A little bit about my background, kind of similar to Casey not in the sense that I used to be a musician, but this is sort of my first foray into biotech. And my path has kind of been like a call myself a serial entrepreneur. I've started and exited a few software companies. Most recent one, a company called CloudSnap that was sold to Paylocity in I guess the beginning of 2022, and kind of was like trying to figure out what my next step in life was going to be, and ended up getting hooked up with Casey, and he was talking a lot about just the broken system, and really connected with me. I also have actually have 3 special needs kids that we had adopted. And one of them has a neurological disorder. And so I had certainly understood part of the journey that Casey had been going through. And so it really resonated with me. And yeah, we started Everlum Bio to help solve some of those big problems.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that, both of you. Really appreciate it. So why don't we sort of dive into the company, how you guys started it? I know you kind of mentioned a little bit about the reason why you started it, but how did it actually happen?
Well, if we go backwards, it really began with all the problems. And on the next slide, we'll sort of show some of those main issues. But when Rose was diagnosed, I took the whole exome sequence to the neurologist, and he said, Casey, your daughter has a rare genetic disease. There is no cure. There's no clinical trial. There's nothing we can do. So good luck. And what it really boiled down to was, I after talking to hundreds of biotech company executives and academics and drug developers and foundations was that we do have technologies to cure many of these rare diseases. What we don't have are the systems and the pipelines and scalable models and business models to do it. Right now, currently, you need at least 1,000 diagnosed patients in a market for a rare disease treatment to be profitable. And we'll get into this a little bit later, but because drugs are built on this very old system, in my opinion, of intellectual property and going to market like a product, that we are missing out. Many children and families are missing out on curative treatments because our model doesn't work for them. And so if you look at the numbers, we have over 10,000 rare diseases, which affect over 400 million people in the world. Just cut that in half, that's about 200 million kiddos, and about 15 million alone in the US of children. And those are huge numbers, but then if you even look deeper into many of these genetic mutations have variants. So, a different part of their gene has a different mutation, which could lead to a different drug as well. And so, what's happened is just like me, once I learned, wow, I could create a therapy for my daughter. It just might not be profitable. And that's really the only reason why she didn't have a therapeutic. And when I saw that there were all these children that and not all 200 million have that problem, but many of them, these diseases do. I started a foundation, and the foundations currently are the only way that we can really fund the development of these treatments. It's through donations and grants but it doesn't fix the problem, and what we're seeing now, if you think about, families, there's 200 million kids, then you could almost argue there's at least 100 to 150 million families. And, those families could be carpenters, teachers, lawyers, even doctors. But most of those families, because these diseases are surviving, every day with these children. There's very few resources for special needs kids. Just ask Rick. Rick has to create, an army to help take care of his kiddos, and I just have one, but I'm a single dad, and so it's all hands on deck. But out of all those families, there's a few of them that are saying, okay, we're going to go raise the money and we're going to go do this. And so that now you start seeing all these family foundations popping up around particular genetic mutations, and they're doing different things around. Maybe they're trying to develop a drug. Maybe they're doing funding a natural history study. Maybe they're funding a registry and they're trying to collect cell lines. But 5-10 years ago, making a drug for these diseases would have been near impossible. It would have cost, $30 million in 10 years just to get to a trial. Now we're seeing foundations like what Julia Vitarello did with Mila, and what recently Terry did with SBG 50 with his son, have used these current technologies and been able to get to a phase 1 trial with as little as $2 to $4 million. Very, very different than the price tag for biotech and pharma, and so, when I learned all that, I could not do this, and I think as part of the story of Everlum, I think we can, basically we ran into all these problems, which I'll get into, Rick and I'll get into in a little bit, but we ran into all these problems and realized that there's really no one in the current system that can do this efficiently. And I remember sitting on the front porch with my CSO at the time, Rodney Bowling, and who's a brilliant drug developer, and said, man, I wish we just had a place we could just do this work and do it better and do it faster. And within weeks, I met Rick. And I was, pitching Rick for a donation to the foundation. He's like, isn't there maybe a way we could solve this besides just, donating? And so Rick and I got together and we started talking about this lab idea. And, very quickly came up with a initial business model. And Rodney quit his job and at a leading biotech company here in Austin, and Everlum was born, with the mission and the idea that could we create a genetic treatment for one person in one day. Now, we're not there yet by any means, but we've seen what used to take 10 years and then took 5 has taken as short as 12 months to develop a genetic treatment and get it into a phase 1 trial, from diagnosis to administration. And
I think I was going to mention this really
Rick.
quickly. I think one of the interesting things is, especially just kind of like getting into the space and seeing where Casey started, a couple, 2-3 years ago to where we are now. And there's been, costs have dropped, fairly dramatically, and timescales have dropped dramatically as well. So even from when Casey first started this journey to now, there's been a lot of improvements in the whole process. And so I think a lot of people don't understand how something like this is becoming more and more attainable.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and so we wanted to provide a space for families to do this work efficiently and quickly. And, we see a world where genetic treatments are no longer a drug, but they're a molecular procedure, if you will. That the next dad that walks into the neurologist, the next mom that walks into a neurologist with a genetic report, instead of saying, good luck, nothing we can do, says, hold on, we're going to take your data, we're going to build a genetic treatment, and we'll administer it to your child, and that's what we're living for, and that's the dream that I think, like Rick says, this is closer to reality than we think, and I believe that to be true, but we've got to build these systems in order to get there. I want to sort of back up for a second.
Sure. I just want to say one thing as well. First of all, thanks for sharing that origin story. Really powerful. I think you guys are obviously doing this from, the bottom of your hearts. This really means the world to you guys. And I think it is important for people to realize like how much technology has improved over recent years. Like, for example, Casey, you probably, if your daughter was born, 20 years ago, maybe she might not have had that whole exome sequencing done to identify what disease she had, for example. So like just those diagnostics technologies are starting to become more available. And you might have known that, but many parents might not be aware of it. So I think it's important to keep spreading that message about there is something that these parents can do. And you guys are a great example of parents who are doing something about this. So I just want to say kudos to you guys. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ray. I mean, and that's a perfect segue into, backing up. I'll tell you what my experience was and what most of these families are going through, and where Everlum really wanted to step in and change this this is one piece of the problem is, at diagnosis, most of the pediatric neurologists or pediatricians don't even know that you can order a whole genome or whole exome sequence. They're running panels because it's all that insurance companies are really approving. And so in order to really get down to the bottom of what a genetic mutation might be, you need to run a whole genome sequence. Well, when our whole exome sequence was 10 grand 4 years ago. Now we can do a whole genome sequence for as little as $200 or $300. So the price has dramatically come down, but insurance, and pediatricians and pediatric neurologists are still, as a whole, not recommending, that's where you should start. Really, it's cheap, it's relatively quick, and you can get to the bottom of the problem. And so a disease like my daughter's, 100 known patients, but really it's about 1 in 50,000 born. So there's really probably about 10,000 people with her disease worldwide, about 3,000 in the US. But because we're not utilizing diagnostics, we're calling it autism, or we're calling it a seizure disorder, or they're giving giving a diagnosis based on just what they're seeing visually, a clinical phenotype. And so we're missing a lot of we're missing, millions of kiddos in a market because we're not diagnosing properly. That when you do get your diagnosis, my experience was the only way you can develop a drug is you go to an academic institution. And so there's 2 ways to pay for an academic institution. One is just give them a donation, and the other is to build a contract around an SRA agreement, which is what biotech companies do. But what's happening? So these treatments are so rare. So there's really no market for them, and so families will raise money. Will either more than likely give it to the academic institution, and there's a scientist that's championing this. That's saying, okay, I'm going to use a current technology like ASOs, gene therapy, base editing, something, small molecule, and we're gonna get your cell lines. We're going to test some drugs, and we're going to optimize the drug and get it ready to go through an IND process at the FDA. The problem with that, no matter how great the scientists are, is that academic institutions are IP havens. And so what my experience was, I began to negotiate with the tech transfer office to own this intellectual property. And I'll share with you why that was so important that I owned it. And they didn't know what to do because they're typically used to getting $1 million milestones for these kinds of agreements. And so you're paying this researcher to build this drug, but ultimately the academic institutions will own it. And what they typically do at that point is they'll license it out to a biotech company. And so what we've seen over the last 5 years is many of these family foundations have created these treatments in academia, but academic institutions own them. Then they license them to biotech companies, to people in the industry. The problem with that was all these biotech companies are venture capital backed, and they need to see a return in a certain amount of time. And so if you're running multiple programs, guess which program gets dropped first? It's that one that those families raised hundreds of thousands of dollars to create a proof of concept drug. And so what we've seen now, especially, this last year was terrible, are all of these curative treatments getting shelved. They're being stuck as intellectual property in these biotech companies because, as you can see in the beginning, the system was already sort of working against you, And, if you can even make it past all of that, the way that the requirements in the FDA, if I made a drug for Rose, their tox requirements, it's over $1 million package. It's the same as if I made a drug for 10,000 kiddos. So, I can make a drug for 1/10 of the price that it costs to get it through the FDA with GMP manufacturing and tox packages. So there's a disconnect here with how we're doing drug regulatory requirements for these rare diseases. This isn't aspirin. This isn't a vaccine for hundreds of millions of people. This is a drug for a child, 10 children, 100 children. These things should go really, really quickly. And there should be an affordability to it and access to it, which just does not exist at the moment. But it's like the DMV for drug development. And, there's a lot of great people in the FDA, but they're there to keep the crackpots out. And so there's a lot of renovation in this whole system that needs to happen. And Everlum wanted to offer a way that families could do this drug development without ever worrying about intellectual property. We are not, we don't take intellectual property from these families, and they own their data, and then Rick can get into some of the data stuff. But that was when that happened to me, and then, I got all the way up to the tech transfer, and eventually we just couldn't come up with a solution. And that's, a month or two later, we started Everlum, we started the conversations around Everlum. But I'm watching other families, literally children are dying while these intellectual property issues are happening in tech transfer and in industry. And so we had to have a different solution for these families doing drug development.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. That is unfortunate that it currently works this way. But I'm hopeful that what you guys are working on, what others in the community are working on, will help to address these sort of antiquated processes and really just create that personalized medicine or experience that I think we can accomplish now with not only the biomedical and biotech technologies, but the digital technologies, the ability to collaborate more effectively online and things like that, and share information. Yeah, thanks for that. Rick, did you have anything to add on this?
No, I think Casey did a great job just sort of explaining the just the problem on why the current system just doesn't work. And yeah, I don't have anything else to add outside of that.
Awesome.
Let's see what the next slide holds. Yeah, so these, when we started with this idea, immediately started getting phone calls. And obviously we started with Rose. We put Everlum into a bioincubator space in Austin, which saved us a lot of money on lab equipment. And we began working with family foundations to do their preclinical drug development. And then we also ended up working with some rare disease biotech companies too. And we found that we could get started really, really fast because there wasn't any IP negotiation. And we're laser focused on how can we do this in a more efficient, scalable way, and reminded that at the end of all these data points are real children, real families, that ultimately the goal is to give these kids a second chance at life. And we know that we have to create a business model around that, unfortunately, to make it scalable. We can't just keep raising donations. These families are breaking their backs to do it. And so, our thought here is if we can bring this cost down and bring the timeline down and get it to where it's more affordable, for the general public to afford, and ultimately for insurance to cover, because that's really what should be happening, but there's a lot of hearts and minds that need to change to get there, but we want to start carving out that model from the development standpoint now, because we believe it's sooner rather than later.
On that point, how have health insurance companies looked at this, and has there been a change in the way that they view drug development for rare diseases now, or the funding of rare disease treatments? At least I know they're not going to necessarily fund early stage research, like most insurance companies, but they should be able to pay for treatments that do exist, right?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the changes that has to take place. So we have current technologies. If there's a gene that needs to be downregulated or upregulated, we're getting to the point where we can get pretty close to determining whether a mutation is amenable to current platform technology around, genetic treatments. That has moved through the FDA, that is proved to be safe. And granted, there's a lot more gray area in that, but really, where we're getting to the point is this is a rinse and repeat process. This isn't a let's go out and search for a drug process. This is a rinse and repeat. Fail, iterate, closer, bam, move into IND. And it's not a fishing expedition. Sometimes it is, but there are many times where it's not anymore. And I think that's what's sort of new for humanity. We've never had that opportunity ever, in the history of our existence, that we could edit our genome in this way for many of these diseases, and prove over and over and over again we can do it.
And I think one of the other sort of like key things, it's like, and again, this is why Everlum exists, is the system is not, Casey's talking about what is, the first time in humanity that we can start to do some of these, we can start to build some of these therapies, and the system is not built for that. From the business side to the companies to really every piece along the road, it's not built for this sort of like new paradigm. And that's really where, that's really what we're doing over at Everloom, is building a company around this idea that people should just be able to, if they have a genetic issue, they should just be able to very easily get it fixed. And it shouldn't be this incredibly difficult thing that it is now, because the system is just not built for that. And so, talking about insurance, that's a big piece of it. The FDA is a big piece of it. Just the technology, putting the systems and things in place is a big piece of it. And Everloom's, doing a lot of those, working on a lot of those things, but there's certainly stuff that also I would say is outside of our control, like insurance. And I think that you're certainly seeing some movement and interest in looking at things differently. But I would say there's still like a very long way to go, both on the FDA side and on the insurance side, to really like have them start looking at this differently. And even the term that, I love the term that Casey used earlier, molecular surgery, because if you think about a surgery, you're not going to get like the special approval process every time a surgeon does a surgery. And sometimes, even if you look at surgeries, it's not like 100% guaranteed thing. Sometimes surgeries fail, and I really think that's the direction that Everloom is working on, is really like trying to like help people look at this as a completely different type of thing, instead of putting it in just like the same biotech box that drugs have been developed on for the past 50, 60 years.
Absolutely. And I can imagine like how important this is to families that are looking for something to help them, to help their children. So yeah, I mean, let's learn more. Let's continue.
Yeah, so to prevent an idea that we're being a little naive here. This is incredibly difficult. Developing a drug is incredibly difficult. But why? If we have these platforms that are working for many of these diseases, why is it taking so long? And one of the biggest reasons we've seen is that we are because intellectual property is how we are looking at drugs. Every biotech company and academic institution is an island of data. And this is where, you know, crypto comes in and other like blockchain specifically and some possible other solutions, and certainly AI, which is what we're banking on as well. But if you look at the system, we have all of this data around, say, gene therapies, vectors that work, promoters that work, antisense oligonucleotides, which we do a lot of that work. There's a lot of assay development and testing these things and gathering data. Is it toxic? What are the off-targeting effects? You know, what if you build it this way, what happens? Well, see, because academic institutions, their primary, you know, in order to keep a lab going, you have to publish papers so that you can get more funding. And oftentimes when you're publishing, you're leaving out a lot of the mistakes and a lot of the data. You're publishing on your discovery. When you are a company, you have hundreds of millions of dollars invested in you, and you cannot risk the FDA saying no because you had bad data. And so oftentimes that data is under lock and key. And so we're seeing this from companies and academic institutions. We're seeing this tiny sliver of data that's published, data that we saw that we should have seen 2 years ago. Now we're seeing a tiny sliver of it. Companies, a drug didn't work, no one knows why. A drug did work, but no one knows why all their other iterations didn't. And so there's these silos of data all over the place. And you look at, so understanding that that's happening, okay, that's a problem. But then you look at when we bring technology in to say, hey guys, we want to share data. And they're like, they're like, talk to my attorneys. And so where technology brings this ability to connect data pieces, the business model is still built on holding your IP tight. And so for us, where we've really been thinking about is how do we create incentives for people to share their data? And ultimately, the way that we're looking at it and sort of where we're going to spend some of our time this year and have spent some of our time is taking the model of, say, Google. Google's a data company, but they create a badass search engine that everybody wanted to use. Facebook is a social media company. We're willingly sharing our data with them because I love getting to see products that I'm marketed to, you know, that I already like. I like what I'm getting, and so I am willing to share a certain amount of data with these companies. And we know that if I just type in to Google ski resort in, you know, France, and I'm in Austin, that data doesn't have a whole lot of value. But if enough people type in ski resort in France, then they begin to sort of create a profile on people that like ski resorts in France. Well, it's the same that works with like RNA therapeutics. So we designed thousands and thousands of these drugs that have zero data attached to them. But if in our process is we're testing those drugs on cell lines and we're getting data around that. And typically what happens is all that data is just thrown away because we get to that optimized one drug, and that's what we take to the FDA. We're designing systems where we can take all of that data from the very beginning and we say, hey, that bad data, that data where it didn't work, we think that that's really valuable. Because with each one of those data points, we create a profile around that drug design. And we believe that we're going to be seeing patterns around that. And ultimately, those kinds of data sets with all of these platforms are crucial to cutting down the time and the costs of the drug development. into no more assays, no more animal models, because we have predictive technology we've proven that says this drug is going to work because we have millions of data points that support it. And so we're big believers that that's going to be the way through. Our challenge is, can we create that incentive for companies and academics to share it in a way where it's de-identified data? So it doesn't violate their intellectual. We have to work in the old system while creating the new system,
Absolutely.
And that's really the challenge.
For sure. And a lot of the things you just said resonate with the themes of like decentralized science as like a category right now in the blockchain world. So the ability for all these scientists, researchers to not silo their data. And, like you said, some of them never use it again, or they throw it out. I hope they don't throw it out. Like, this is something that these experiments cost time and they cost money, and someone had to conduct them. And there are insights that people can gain from them. So I also feel like, having these large pharma companies or biotechs essentially hide some of that data only to have the same experiments be rerun by multiple other companies again and again with maybe some slightly different results, but never shared. It doesn't make any sense to me. If our goal is to focus on treating patients or to help reach new treatments and cures, why are we like working against each other in some ways? Yeah, I'm with you there. And it's the cultural thing, right? It's not something that is necessarily a policy. It's just sort of partially capitalism as it exists today. You mentioned crypto and blockchain. I think that with the evolution of decentralized ledger technologies, there is an opportunity. And I think DeSci is really like leading this charge. There's an opportunity to allow multiple companies, researchers to aggregate that data somehow and provide feedback and have this like sort of community of scientists with a single purpose of achieving a certain goal or finding a cure or something like that. So yeah, very interesting.
Rick, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. One of the other ways that we're kind of looking at that, I think one of the keys that Casey mentioned is incentives. And so, eventually I think the culture will change, but it's not going to be, it's not going to be a light switch. It's going to be like it's going to be a long road for especially like big pharma to sort of like change from the way that they've always done things. And so one of the things that Everlum's working on is tools that incentivize folks to share that data. And for instance, we're working on a platform that uses AI to do RNA therapeutics, specifically antisense oligonucleotides, and not just in the design, but also in sort of like managing the entire life cycle of developing that particular therapeutic. And so companies are all of a sudden incentivized to use tools like that. Just like we talked about with Google or with Facebook, you give your data because you want to use the platform that they've developed. And so we're also looking at going down some of those roads and developing tools that not only that really do like change the game and utilize some of these cutting edge technologies to make drug development quicker and faster and more intuitive and all of those things.
Interesting. So thanks for sharing that. And it sounds like you guys already have like a services and products you are helping these organizations with. Can you kind of describe them in a little bit more detail as well? Like what services that you offer specifically in addition to what you already have?
Sure. I think at our core, it's the lab as a service. Like that's like the core of who we are right now. I mean, the way that we're sort of looking at, you see the slide, the personalized medicine company. There's a long road that we need to travel to truly become a personalized medicine company that's available to the masses. And so the way that we're approaching it is, right now we have our rare disease lab as a service where customers can come, they can, essentially contract with us to develop a therapeutic for their child with a neurological disorder. And that's sort of like the first, we help them along the entire journey, because a lot of folks, when they're just starting out, they have no idea where to turn to. And now there's Everlum, they can turn to us and we can kind of help them through that journey. And so that's sort of like the first pillar, I guess you could say. And then the question is, how are we going to bring down the costs to make this available to everybody? Because right now, as Casey mentioned, you either have to be wealthy or you have to start a foundation, fundraise, go down that whole road. But that's not the ultimate goal. And we feel that there's going to be lots of technological breakthroughs to get to being a personalized medicine company. Some of those breakthroughs are going to happen through Everloom. Some of them are going to happen through other companies, and we're just going to use the things that other people are building to continue to bring down that cost. For us, the next thing that we're working on the technology side is this platform we're calling the RNA-1 platform, which is it's basically our platform that utilizes AI to develop these antisense oligonucleotides, these ASOs that then become the therapeutics that these families can use to help their children. So that's sort of like the next pillar that we're working on is how can we take some of these different technologies? And one of the things that I think is underappreciated is just how quickly these technologies are advancing, and way faster than people expected. One of the things that I've said multiple times is, even if Everloom itself never invented anything, if we just built the systems and built the process in place to take advantage of all of these new things that are coming down the pipe, that in of itself is going to be a big innovation, because it's going to create that system that allows families to start to utilize some of these services. And the more that technology advances, the more the cost comes down, the larger the pool of potential folks that can use those services gets. And so that's kind of how we sort of look at it, is let's create the system, and then let's start picking some of these things that we feel we can make the biggest impact on, to start bringing down the cost and bringing down the time it takes to create some of these therapeutics. Casey, I don't know if you have anything more to add to that or not.
No, I mean, that's great. I mean, what we're seeing too is, it's been interesting for us, because when we launched, we started working with family foundations, and obviously Rose was our first client. And I had reached a place where I'd developed cell lines. And so, I was at a certain stage. And what we're seeing is, some foundations have made cell lines. They've actually tried to do therapeutic development, and something failed, and they can't get that data back. And so in some cases, we're having to redo experiments that they've already done in an academic institution or a partnership with a company, and they can't get the data. And I had a similar experience with the animal models, but where we're trying to go this year is really from get closer to the beginning. The less a parent has to become a drug developer and an expert at their disease, the more I feel like we're solving that problem. And so if we can be given a genetic report and do an amenability study on the disease with the pediatric neurologist or pediatrician, and say, okay, we believe one of these technologies we work with is, the disease is amenable to, we can get started on that project really quickly. There's no 6 months of negotiating with the tech transfer office. There's no parent that needs to be an expert at the steps and the processes to get to a proof of concept drug, and so that part's very exciting to me, that, we have this group of foundations we're working with that are wonderful people, but in many ways they've become like me, and that they've had to become experts at their disease. And so, we're hoping to see a world where like Rick said, it's more affordable. A general person could afford it, and a world where these parents get a diagnosis and they can continue to try to live their best life with these kids while we work our asses off to try to give them a second chance.
Yeah, I can only imagine how valuable this is for patients, really for families who are not biotech people. They're not healthcare people either. They're just normal families. We're given this diagnosis and kind of lost, and then you guys can come in and sort of help their journey. It's not going to fix their journey totally, but at least it gives them something, and I think that's something that is extremely valuable. So really appreciate what you guys are working on, and really grateful for you to come on the show and sharing this experience with us, the community. And I am definitely hopeful for the future of biotech, the future of personalized medicine. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. We've talked a lot about Everlum, rare disease, the communities, the families, and how you guys came together to provide these services. Is there anything else, Rick and Casey, that you'd like to share before we kind of wrap up this conversation?
I don't think I have anything. Definitely appreciate you facilitating and having us on.
Definitely.
I mean, the last thing I would say is I think what's crucial is that no one person can solve these issues. And so we really need to be building an ecosystem of companies and thought leaders and move into this world together. The idea that we're better together is really fundamental of AI data set, but it's also the fundamentals of the human experience when it comes to moving the needle. So, companies like Bio and, very supportive of, and Everlum and others like IXLs and La Jolla Labs and Kalara, and just looking at this ecosystem we're building, the more we can work together, the more we can create systems together, I think the more opportunity we have to succeed.
Absolutely. Can't agree with you more. Thank you to our guests. If you have any questions, concerns, or ideas generated from today's discussion, please reach out to us by email or through any of our social media platforms. We love your comments, likes, shares, and we would love to talk to you and invite you to the Vibe community. So thanks again.